The morning Marwyn Hollis arrived at Ashendale Hall. The rain had not yet stopped, and the gravel under the carriage wheels sounded like teeth grinding together. Cordelia Vane stood at the tall window of the morning room, watching the carriage slow. Her fingers were pressed against the glass, and the cold of it seeped into her skin until she could no longer feel where her hand ended and the window pane began. She had been told the new lady's maid would arrive before noon. It was now 10:30. The carriage was here, and Cordelia could not breathe. "You will not faint," she said, aloud, alone. "You will not faint, Cordelia Vane." She had been practicing her own name for 3 weeks. Cordelia Vane, soon to be Cordelia Ashendale, soon to be the Marchioness of something she could not pronounce without her tongue tripping over the syllables. 3 weeks of practicing, and her own future name still felt borrowed. The carriage door opened. A small woman stepped down, holding her bonnet against the wind. The agency had described her as discreet, experienced, and accustomed to noble households. Cordelia had imagined someone severe and gray. This woman looked perhaps 50, with iron-colored hair pinned with quiet precision under her bonnet, and a face that gave nothing away. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pendle, hurried down the front steps with an umbrella. The new maid did not look at the house. She looked, Cordelia noticed, at the gardens, at the long drive, at the lead of the windows. She looked the way a buyer looks at a property she is considering. Cordelia stepped back from the window before the woman could glance up. "You are nervous." Lady Drusilla Ashendale stood in the doorway behind her, holding a cup of chocolate. "It is becoming on you. Brides are meant to be nervous. It reassures the household that you take the matter seriously." Cordelia turned. "Aunt Drusilla, you are not helping." "I am not trying to help, dear. I am observing." Drusilla, who was not in fact her aunt, but had insisted upon the title, came into the room. "The new maid is here, then. Discreet little thing. Where did she come from?" "The agency in Bentham Court. Lady Hollyford recommended them." Hollyford recommendations are usually trustworthy, though I will say, there is something about a maid one has not chosen oneself that always feels like an inspection, as if the house itself is being measured. She smiled with no warmth in it. But that is only my morbid imagination. Pay it no mind. Cordelia paid it considerable mind. She had been at Ashendale Hall for 1 month. 1 month of being walked through galleries that contained portraits going back 400 years, of being asked her opinion about menus and the placement of dinner guests. 1 month of being treated, very politely, like a piece of fine porcelain whose authenticity had not yet been certified. The wedding was in 5 weeks. 5 weeks until she became the wife of Lord Theron Ashendale, the Marquess of Ashendale, the only son and sole heir of a family whose name was older than the river that ran through their land. Theron had proposed in the garden of his cousin's estate 7 months ago on a summer evening so still that the bees had stopped working. He had said her name twice, the second time as though he had only just understood it, and then he had asked her to marry him, and she had said yes before she had time to be afraid. The fear came afterwards. The fear was now, because Cordelia Vane was not the bride that the Ashendale family had planned for. She was the daughter of a country gentleman with a respectable estate and an unfashionable surname. Her dowry was solid, but not extraordinary. She had been chosen, she suspected, for one reason only. Theron Ashendale had refused everyone else. She had not yet met his mother. The Dowager Marchioness of Ashendale, Lady Brennaugh Ashendale, was in residence at the family's northern estate, and would, according to Theron, return to Ashendale Hall a fortnight before the wedding. She had sent letters, brief, civil, perfectly worded letters that welcomed Cordelia into the family, with the kind of welcome one offers a guest one has not invited. Her sentences were short. She had used the word delighted 3 times across 4 letters, which Cordelia had counted, and which she suspected was a precise number. In Cordelia's experience, women like the Dowager did not form opinions from letters. They formed opinions from rooms. A soft knock at the morning room door. "Come." Mrs. Pendle entered. Behind her stood the new maid, hands folded, eyes lowered, perfectly still. "Miss Vane, this is Marwyn Hollis, your new lady's maid. The agency speaks very highly of her." Cordelia rose. She took 2 steps forward and stopped. The maid raised her eyes. They were not the eyes of a servant. There was nothing visibly wrong with them. They were simply too direct. They held Cordelia's gaze for 1 full second, before lowering, and in that single second, Cordelia felt herself being looked at the way one is looked at by a person who has already decided what they are going to find, not unkindly, not coldly, but with a certainty that made the back of her neck prickle. "Miss Vane," the maid said. Her voice was low and even. "I am pleased to be of service. I welcome you to Ashendale Hall, Miss Hollis." "Miss Hollis," the maid corrected gently. "I have never married." "Forgive me." "Miss Hollis." "It is no offense. The mistake is common." The mistake was not common. Ladies' maids were almost universally addressed as Mrs., regardless of marital status, as a matter of courtesy. Cordelia had used the correct form. The maid had corrected her anyway, and Cordelia recognized the maneuver at once. She had been gently put in her place. She smiled. "Miss Hollis, then. Mrs. Pendle will show you to your quarters. We will begin tomorrow at 7. 6, the maid said. "I beg your pardon?" "In a household of this standing, a lady's maid begins at 6. I would not wish you to be unprepared on any morning." 6, then. "Thank you." The maid inclined her head. Mrs. Pendle steered her charge out of the room. The door closed. Lady Drusilla made a small, amused sound into her chocolate. "Well," Drusilla said, "she is going to be interesting. She corrected me." "She did. On a small thing." Cordelia turned. "Aunt Drusilla, where exactly did you say she came from?" Drusilla shrugged. "Bentham Court. The agency. Lady Hollyford's recommendation." "Why do you ask?" Cordelia did not answer. She walked back to the window. The carriage was being led around to the stables. The rain had thinned to a drizzle. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to strike 11. The wedding was in 5 weeks. The Dowager was in residence at the northern estate. The new maid had eyes that did not belong to a servant. And Cordelia Vane, who had been raised by a careful father to notice careful things, felt that she had walked into a house with rules she did not yet know how to read. She pressed her fingers against the cold glass. 6 in the morning, she said softly to herself, is a peculiar hour to set. Behind her, Lady Drusilla finished her chocolate. The first morning, Marwyn Hollis was already in the dressing room when Cordelia entered. The fire had been lit. A jug of warm water steamed on the washstand. The gray morning gown that Cordelia had selected the night before was laid across the back of the chair, and beside it, Marwyn had laid out 3 other gowns. Pale blue. Cream. A muted dove color Cordelia had never worn. Cordelia stopped in the doorway. "I had asked for the gray, Miss Hollis." "You had, miss." Marwyn did not look up from the brush she was warming near the fire. "I took the liberty of laying out alternatives. A first morning with a new maid is often a useful occasion to consider one's wardrobe afresh." "My wardrobe does not require consideration." "Forgive me, miss. I meant no impertinence." But she had meant impertinence. Cordelia could feel it the way one feels a draft from a door not quite closed. The tone was perfect. The deference was perfect. And underneath all of it, there was a small, precise authority that Cordelia could not name and could not dismiss. She sat down at the dressing table. Marwyn moved behind her without being asked, and began to take down her hair. The brush was warm. The hands were practiced. Cordelia could tell within the first 3 strokes that Marwyn Hollis had been doing this for 30 years. The brush did not pull. The fingers did not fumble. The sectioning was instinctive. This was a woman who had been brushing other women's hair her whole life. "You have done this for many households," Cordelia said. "For a few, miss." "Where, before Bentham Court?" A short pause. "A house in the north, miss. The lady passed away 2 years ago, and I was placed elsewhere." "What was the family in the north?" "The Ferroby family, miss. A small estate. I have not heard of them." "It was a small estate, miss." Cordelia met her own eyes in the looking-glass. Marwyn did not meet them. Cordelia understood with absolute clarity that the Ferroby family did not exist. She let it pass. "What time does the household rise, Miss Hollis?" "His lordship rises at 7, miss. He breakfasts at 5:30. The kitchen begins at 5. The under-housemaids begin at 5:30. Mrs. Pendle is generally about by 6. The post arrives at 9:15, weather permitting." She had been at Ashendale Hall for less than a day. "You have learnt the household very quickly." "It is my work to learn it quickly, miss." "Yes," Cordelia said. "I imagine it is." Marwyn finished the hair. She did it in a style Cordelia had not asked for. Looser at the temples and softer at the back, with 2 small pins placed in a way that made Cordelia look, when she finally let herself look in the glass, 3 years younger than she was. It was beautiful. It was also a correction. Cordelia had been wearing her hair too tight, the way young women wear their hair when they are afraid of being thought frivolous. Marwyn had not said this. Marwyn had simply done it differently, and now the result was sitting on Cordelia's head, kind and quiet, and absolutely impossible to argue with. "Thank you, Miss Hollis." "Of course, miss." Cordelia did not wear the gray gown. She wore the dove. When she descended to breakfast, Lord Theron Ashendale looked up from his correspondence and held her gaze for 1 second longer than usual, and Cordelia felt a slow, quiet heat rise into her cheeks. "You look well this morning." "Thank you." "Is that a new gown?" "It is a gown I do not often wear." "You should wear it more often. It suits you." Cordelia took her seat. The footman poured her tea. Across the table, Lady Drusilla was watching her with a small, knowing expression. "Theron," Drusilla said conversationally. "When does your mother arrive?" Theron did not look up. "A fortnight before the wedding, as planned." "Has she written?" "She wrote last week. She is well." "And in good spirits?" "She is in her usual spirits." "Ah," said Drusilla. She buttered her toast. "Then we must all prepare ourselves accordingly." Cordelia set down her cup. "Aunt Drusilla, what are the dowager's usual spirits?" Theron looked up at her. It was a brief look, but it was attentive. "My mother," Theron said carefully, "has very high standards. Of conduct. Of everything. I see. She also has a way of arriving at conclusions that does not always include a visible process. She makes up her mind, and then one is informed of what her mind has decided. I have learnt not to attempt to influence the process. It does not respond to influence." "That sounds very lonely," Cordelia said, before she could stop herself. Theron's hand stilled on his coffee cup. "It is," he said after a moment. "Yes, it is." Across the table, Lady Drusilla had stopped buttering her toast. There was a long silence in the room. Then a footman entered with a folded note on a silver salver. A message for Miss Vane, from the housekeeper. Cordelia took the note. She did not open it. "I shall come now," she said. "Excuse me." She rose. She walked the length of the long corridor, with her hands folded carefully in front of her, and only when she had reached the small writing room at the end of the east wing did she allow herself to sit down on the small, embroidered chair and press her palms against her eyes and breathe. "It is," Theron had said. "Yes, it is. A man did not say that about his mother by accident." A knock at the door. Soft. 3 short raps. "Come." Marwyn Hollis entered, carrying a small tray with a fresh cup of tea. She set it down on the writing desk. "I thought you might want this, miss." "How did you know I was here?" "I asked Mrs. Pendle, miss." "And how did Mrs. Pendle know?" A small pause. "She did not, miss. I observed which direction you went, and I considered which room a lady might choose, in this house, when she wished to be alone." Cordelia looked up. Marwyn was standing by the desk, with her hands folded, and her eyes lowered, and her face entirely composed. But her shoulders, Cordelia noticed for the first time, were not the shoulders of a servant. They were the shoulders of a woman who had stood in long galleries and at the heads of long tables and had been bowed to. "Miss Hollis." "Yes, miss." "Who are you exactly?" The maid did not move. Outside, somewhere very far away in the great house, a clock began to strike. The maid did not move. The clock struck 9, then it stopped, and the silence that followed was the kind of silence that had weight, that pressed against the windows and against the small blue rug on the floor and against Cordelia's own ribs. Marwyn Hollis raised her eyes. For one long moment, Cordelia thought the woman was about to tell her the truth. There was a flicker, a tightening of the line at the corner of her mouth, the kind of expression a person wears when they have been asked the right question at the wrong moment, and they are calculating very rapidly how much they can afford to give away. Then it was gone, and Marwyn Hollis was, once more, simply a lady's maid. "I am Marwyn Hollis, miss. I am your lady's maid. I came to your service yesterday at 10:30 in the morning, by way of the agency in Bentham Court, with a recommendation from Lady Hollyford. I have brushed your hair this morning, and I have laid out your wardrobe, and I have brought you tea because you appeared to want it. That is who I am." It was very gracefully done. It was also a refusal. Cordelia looked at the tea. She did not pick it up. "You learnt this house too quickly," she said. "I am attentive, miss. You corrected me yesterday on a point of address. You changed the dressing of my hair without permission. You came into a room where I had gone to be alone, and you brought me a cup of tea before I had thought to ask for it. These are not the actions of a lady's maid newly come from an agency. These are the actions of a woman accustomed to managing other women. Forgive me, miss. I have given offense. You have not given offense. You have given me the impression that you are not what you appear to be. And I would like, please, to know what I am dealing with, in my own dressing room, before my wedding." A very long pause. Marwyn Hollis did something then that Cordelia did not expect. She smiled. It was a small smile, and it did not last more than a moment, and there was nothing condescending in it. It was the smile of a woman who has been caught at something, and who has decided that being caught is, on balance, not the worst outcome. You have a careful eye, Miss Vane. I have been taught to. By whom, may I ask? By my father. He is a magistrate. Ah, that would explain it. You have not answered my question, Miss Hollis. No, miss. I have not. Outside the window, beyond the hedges of the east garden, a thrush began to sing. It sang for perhaps 10 seconds, and then it stopped, and Cordelia thought that she had never in her life heard a silence as loud as the one that filled the writing room after the thrush stopped singing. I will say this much, miss. I have been a lady's maid for many years, in many houses. The agency in Bentham Court is real. Lady Hollyford's recommendation is real. The Ferroby family is not, and I apologize for that small fiction, which was a precaution. I do not always use my own history when I take a new position. I do not intend you any harm, Miss Vane. I came to this house to do honest work, and I came for a private reason that does not concern you, and which will not interfere with your service. A private reason? Yes, miss. In a house where, in 5 weeks, I am to be married. Yes, miss. And you expect me to accept this? I expect nothing, miss. You are entirely free to dismiss me. If you require my dismissal, I will pack my things this hour and go. I will leave you a recommendation to the agency for your next maid, and you will not see me again. It was a very neat speech. A maid did not offer to dismiss herself. A maid did not stand in a small writing room with a tray she had not been asked to bring and speak in even complete sentences about a private reason. A maid, when caught in a fiction, became flustered, or apologetic, or sullen. A maid did not become composed. Cordelia thought of the dowager's letters, folded in the drawer beside her bed. Brenagh Ashendel, a handwriting that was beautiful and short and exact. Cordelia did not look at Marwyn Hollis when she next spoke. Tell me, Miss Hollis, have you ever, in your years of service, worked in a household where the family were of very high rank? I have, miss. How high? High enough, miss. Higher than this house? The smallest of smiles, again, at the corner of the maid's mouth. Comparable, miss. Cordelia raised her eyes. She did not say what she was thinking. To say it would be to give away that she had thought it, and a careful father had taught her that there are some thoughts a woman keeps in her own pocket until she has a use for them. But she thought it. She thought, "You are not a lady's maid at all." Very well, Miss Hollis. Cordelia rose. She smoothed the front of the dove gown. You will continue in my service for the present. We shall not refer to this conversation again. I will expect you in the dressing room at 6 tomorrow morning. Yes, miss. And Miss Hollis, if your private reason should at any point begin to concern me, or this household, or my future husband, I will expect you to tell me, before I learn it from someone else. The maid inclined her head. There was something in the gesture that was not quite a servant's nod. It was a fraction too slow, a fraction too deliberate. You have my word, Miss Vane. Thank you. You may go. Marwyn Hollis went. The door closed. The tea on the writing desk had gone cold. Cordelia sat down again on the embroidered chair, and she pressed her hands flat against the wood of the desk, and she found that her hands were shaking, very slightly, in the way they had not shaken since she was a girl of 15 at her first ball. She did not understand what was happening in her own house. She understood only that something was happening, and that whoever Marwyn Hollis was, the woman had been placed in Cordelia's dressing room deliberately, and Cordelia did not yet know by whom. She rose. She walked back through the long corridor, all the way to the long window at the end of the west corridor, where one could see, on a clear day, the road that came up from the south. The road was empty. She stood there for a long time, looking at nothing, and the thought that came to her was very small and very quiet and very certain. If the dowager wished to know what kind of woman her son was marrying, the dowager would not wait until a fortnight before the wedding to find out. The dowager would have already arrived. Cordelia turned from the window. Down the corridor, she could just hear the sound of Marwyn Hollis, somewhere in the house, opening and closing a drawer. It rained for the next 3 days, and in that time, Cordelia learned to read Marwyn Hollis the way other women learn to read music. The maid did not slip again. There were no more small fictions, no more careful corrections, no more impossibly precise observations about the household. Marwyn had withdrawn into the perfect performance of her role. Hair brushed at 6, wardrobe laid out, linens checked, silences held. But she had had the conversation in the writing room, so she watched. She watched the way Marwen's eyes moved when Lord Theron entered a room. Not the way a servant looked at a master. The way a person looked at someone they had known for a very long time and were trying not to be seen looking at. A held breath, a hand folded a half-second too quickly. On the fourth morning, Cordelia was at her writing desk when Marwen brought her chocolate. "Miss Hollis, how long is it since you saw your last mistress?" A small hesitation. 2 years, miss. And in the time since. I've been at Bentham Court, miss. Mending. Light service. The lady of the house had her own maid of long standing. I was taken on as a second. It was a flawless answer, and Cordelia did not believe one word of it. She thanked her, took the cup, and waited until Marwen had left before she set it down untouched. That afternoon, Theron found her in the orangery. She had not heard him approach. She was standing with her back to the door, looking at one of the lemon trees, and she did not realize he was there until he spoke. "You have been quiet at meals." She turned. He was standing in the doorway, one hand against the frame, the other holding a folded letter she did not recognize. He was in his riding clothes. There was rainwater still in his hair. "I have not meant to be. I have not minded. I only noticed." She did not know what to say to that. There were still moments, like this one, when he said something perfectly small and perfectly direct, and Cordelia felt the floor of the orangery tilt very slightly under her feet. He came into the room. "You are unhappy with the new maid. What makes you say so? You watch her." "I watch everyone, my lord. Theron." "Theron." He smiled. He set the folded letter down on the low table. "You are unhappy with the new maid, and you have not said why, which is unlike you. You usually tell me what you think within the first minute of being asked." "Do I?" "You do." She turned back to the lemon tree. "Theron, may I ask you something? Your mother, has she ever, in the past, sent anyone ahead of her, to a household, before her arrival?" The silence behind her was very short. When she turned, he was looking at her with an expression she could not entirely read. It was not surprise. It was the expression of a man who has just been shown a piece of a puzzle that he did not realize was already on the table. "Why do you ask?" "It is a foolish question." "Forgive me." "It is not a foolish question." He came closer. He stopped within arm's length of her. "Yes, she has. Once or twice, when she has had a particular reason." Cordelia's hand closed around a fold of her gown. "I see. Cordelia, what have you noticed? Your new lady's maid does not know how to be a lady's maid for the first 10 seconds of any new task. She knows how, after that. But the first 10 seconds, she does not. She thinks. She decides. And then she remembers what she is meant to be, and she becomes it. I have been watching for 3 days. It is a small thing, but it is there." He was very still. "Do you know who she is?" he asked. "No. Do you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I have a suspicion. Will you tell me?" He looked at her then with such a complete and undisguised tenderness that for a moment Cordelia forgot to breathe. He raised one hand, slowly, and he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so unhurried that it felt like an agreement to something neither of them had yet said. "Not yet. Not because I do not trust you. Because if I am right, then she is doing something that I would not like to interrupt. And if I am wrong, then I would have insulted my own mother for nothing. Theron, I know. I am to marry into this family, and I don't even know who is brushing my hair." He almost laughed at that. He took her hand instead. He held it loosely, and he turned it palm up, and he traced one finger across the line of her wrist where the pulse was, and he said, "Will you trust me for 1 week? And then if I have not told you, you may dismiss her. and I will not say a word against the decision. 1 week. 1 week? And if she is who I think she is, then you will have to forgive me, and her in that order." She did not answer. She could not. He raised her wrist very slowly, and he pressed his lips to the pulse just once, and Cordelia felt the heat of it move all the way up into her face and her throat. He let go. He stepped back. He picked up the letter he had set down, and he walked out of the orangery without looking back. The lemon leaves moved gently in a draft from the door he had left open. Cordelia stood very still. She had agreed to 1 week. She had agreed because of the way he had touched her wrist, and because of the way he had said, "Forgive her," in that order. She had agreed against every careful instinct her father had given her, and in the silence of the orangery, with the rain on the glass, she became aware that the woman in her dressing room was a person whose presence Theron had been quietly aware of from the beginning, which meant that whatever was happening in this house was older than her arrival in it. The folded letter was gone from the low table. She did not know whether the heat in her wrist was from his mouth or from the slow, deliberate beginning of a fear she did not yet have a name for. The man arrived on the 8th day, and he arrived in a coat Cordelia recognized before she recognized the man inside it. It was a deep claret coat, cut narrow at the waist, with silver at the buttons. She had seen it at the Hollyford ball 2 summers ago on a man who had stood beside her at the punch table and made her laugh 3 times in 5 minutes, and who had then asked her name and forgotten it before the next dance. She had thought, at the time, that it was a small humiliation she would carry quietly for a year and then forget. She had not forgotten. Now the coat was in the gravel courtyard of Ashendale Hall, and the man wearing it was being helped down from his horse, and Cordelia, who had been crossing the upper gallery with a book in her hand, stopped where she stood. His name was Sir Reland Marche. He was a baronet from a family in the next county, 30 or thereabouts. Unmarried. 2 summers ago, he had been considered one of the most charming young men in 3 shires, and he had walked past her at the punch table the way a man walks past a chair. She did not yet know why he was at Ashendale Hall. She found out within the hour. Lady Drusilla brought the news with the careful pleasure of a woman delivering a small parcel of trouble. Sir Reland had come on family business. His estate bordered the southern edge of the Ashendale lands. He would stay 1 or 2 nights. He was, Drusilla added, unmarried, charming, and quite a catch, although of course that was no longer a matter of any consequence to dear Cordelia. "It is not," Cordelia said. "It is not. Nevertheless, you should come to dinner." Cordelia came to dinner. She wore the cream gown. Marwyn had not asked which she would wear, but the cream had been laid out, and Cordelia had decided to wear it. Marwyn had known what dinner this was before Cordelia had. Sir Reland Marche rose when she entered the dining room. He looked at her for 1 moment too long. "Miss Vane, we have met before, have we? At the Hollyford ball, 2 summers ago. You wore a green sash, you drank ratafia, and you laughed at something I said about the orchestra. Do you not remember?" She remembered the color of his coat. She did not say so. "I remember the ball," she said, mildly. "Then we are old acquaintances." He bowed over her hand. He held it for 1 second longer than necessary. "I confess, Miss Vane, that when I heard of your engagement to Lord Ashendale, I was forced to revise my opinion of my own attentiveness. I had no idea the most interesting woman in 3 counties was about to be carried off by my neighbor." Theron, at the head of the table, did not look up from his soup. "Sir Reland," Theron said, "you will find that the most interesting woman in 3 counties is not in need of your revised opinion." Sir Reland laughed. It was a beautiful laugh. It was a laugh that had been rewarded all his life. He made conversation through the soup and the fish and the mutton. He addressed almost everything to Cordelia, with little glances at Theron in between, the way a man tests a fence by leaning on it gently, and then more. Theron answered in small, neat sentences. He did not, Cordelia noticed, take his eyes off Sir Reland for very long. There was no possessiveness in it. There was only a precise, watchful attention, as though Theron were following a piece of music for a wrong note. Toward the end of the meal, Sir Reland turned to Cordelia. "Miss Vane, I must apologize for the Hollyford ball. I have only just realized that I asked your name and did not retain it. It was a poor manner. I have improved since." "It was not a memorable evening," Cordelia said. "It was not. But you were." The line was very gracefully delivered. It was also 2 summers too late. Theron set his glass down with a fraction more weight than was strictly necessary, and the small chime of crystal against the wood of the table was, somehow, the loudest sound that had been made in the room all evening. "Sir Reland, did you ride from your estate today?" "I did. That is a long ride. I will have the green room made up for you. I imagine you will wish to retire early." "I had hoped to sit up. I find the company excellent." "I am sure you do. But I am a poor host who does not consider his guests' fatigue. You will find the green room restful." Sir Reland understood. Cordelia saw him understand. He smiled beautifully. "You are too kind, Lord Ashendale." After dinner, in the drawing room, Sir Reland came to where Cordelia was standing by the pianoforte. He came very close. "Miss Vane." "Sir Reland." "I find I cannot stop thinking of the Hollyford ball. Forgive me. I will be brief. I would not forgive myself if I did not say, while I have the chance to say it, that I did not see you 2 summers ago, and I see you now. And I find, Miss Vane, that the difference between not seeing and seeing has been a remarkably uncomfortable lesson." He was very practiced. Even knowing it, she felt the small, treacherous flicker in her chest that any woman feels when a charming man tells her, however late, that he has seen her. She felt it. And then she felt the steady weight of Theron's attention from across the room and through the wall, the steady weight of Marwyn Hollis's attention also, and she thought that she was being looked at by 3 people at once, and only one of them was looking at her without a calculation behind it. "Sir Reland, I am glad you have learned the lesson. I am sorry that you are learning it now. Good night." She walked the length of the drawing room with the cream gown moving softly around her ankles, and she did not look back. In her dressing room, half an hour later, Marwyn Hollis took down her hair. She did not say anything for a long time. Then, as she was placing the last pin on the dressing table, very softly, she said, "Sir Reland Marchade's father is owed £40,000 in the city, miss. The estate has been mortgaged twice. He has been looking, this past year, for a wife." Cordelia did not turn. She watched the maid's hands in the looking-glass. "How do you know that, Miss Hollis?" "I have a friend at one of the banks, miss." "A maid does not have a friend at a bank." "No, miss." The maid set down the brush. She met Cordelia's eyes in the looking-glass for the 2nd time since she had arrived in the house, and this time she did not look away. "He is not here for fencing," Marwyn said quietly. "Be careful, miss." She left the room. Cordelia thought, "I have 1 week. He asked me for 1 week. It had been 3 days. The garden at Ashendale Hall had been laid out 120 years ago by a man who had believed that walks should curve, and that benches should be placed where one had something to think about, and that hedges should be tall enough to hide a conversation, but not a lie. Cordelia had learned that the South Walk ended at a bench under a yew, and that the yew was old enough that no sound carried out of it. She went there the next afternoon with a book she had no intention of reading. She had not slept. She had lain awake for most of the night, thinking in slow, concentric circles about Marwyn Hollis and Sir Reland Marchade and the weight of 3 different attentions in a single drawing room. Toward morning, she had reached a small, hard decision. She would not wait the full week. She would not dismiss Marwyn Hollis. She would not confront Theron. She would do what her father had taught her to do when she did not yet know enough. She would let the situation speak. She would put herself in the place where the next piece of the situation was most likely to arrive, and she would wait there, quietly, with a book. She had been there for less than a quarter of an hour when the gravel sounded behind her. It was Sir Reland. Of course it was Sir Reland. He had been watching the house from the south windows of the green room, she realized, and he had seen her cross the lawn. He came around the curve of the hedge with the unhurried pace of a man who has had all morning to consider his approach, and he stopped in front of the bench. "Miss Vane, Sir Reland, I had hoped to find you alone." "You have?" He smiled. He sat down beside her without being invited. He sat closer than the bench required. "Miss Vane, I shall not pretend. Will you allow me to be honest? I cannot prevent you." "You can. You can stand up and walk back to the house. I will not follow." She did not stand up. The truth was that she wanted to know whether Marwyn Hollis had been right about him, and the only way to know was to let him speak. "Speak, then, Sir Reland. Your engagement to Lord Ashendale. May I ask? Is it a love match?" "You may not. I ask because I am told it was made very quickly. You met in the spring. You were engaged by midsummer. These are not the proceedings of a long acquaintance. And Lord Ashendale is a man under considerable pressure to marry. His mother, his estates, his position. You know a great deal about my fiancé, Sir Reland. I know the gossip of the season. So does everyone in 3 counties. I do not say this to wound you. I say it because I do not believe you have been told what you have agreed to. A man like Ashendale does not marry a woman without a calculation behind it. I am not saying he does not admire you. He does. But he is also a man with a problem, and you are, forgive me, a solution that arrived at a convenient time. And you are too fine a woman to have been a solution to anyone." The garden was quiet. A bee moved through the lavender at the edge of the bench. "And what would you have me do, Sir Reland?" "I would have you consider that it is not yet too late. Engagements are broken every season. There would be a small scandal. It would last a month. And after the month, there would be other men. Better men. Men who would court you for yourself and not for your usefulness. Men such as you, Sir Reland. I would not have presumed to put it that way. But yes, men such as me." He had moved, while he was speaking, an inch closer on the bench. She turned her head finally, and she looked at him directly. He was beautiful in the afternoon light. He had eyes that knew their own effect. "Sir Reland, I have one question for you, and then I shall go back to the house. Is it true that your estate has been mortgaged twice, and that your family is, at present, owed £40,000 in the city?" He did not move. He did not blink. But she saw it. She saw the very small, very precise stillness that came over his face. The stillness of a man who has been struck somewhere he did not know he could be struck. "Where?" he said, after a pause that was a heartbeat too long. "Did you hear that?" "I heard it from a friend at the bank, Sir Reland." "You do not have a friend at a bank, Miss Vane?" "No, I do not." She rose from the bench. She closed the book she had not been reading. "But the woman who told me does. And I am beginning to think, Sir Reland, that I should listen rather more carefully to the women in my dressing room than to the men on my benches." He stood up too. He was no longer smiling. The charm had not vanished, but it had thinned, and underneath the thinned charm there was something Cordelia had not seen until this exact moment. It was anger. A small, well-mannered, perfectly tucked-in anger. "Miss Vane, you should be careful what stories you accept in this house." "I will, Sir Reland. I shall begin with yours." She walked back along the south walk at exactly the pace at which she had walked out, and she did not look back, and her hand on the spine of the unread book was perfectly steady. She saw, in her dressing room, Marwyn Hollis straightening the brushes on the dressing table, and Marwyn looked up when Cordelia came in, and saw, instantly, what Cordelia's face was telling her. The maid set the brush down. "Miss," she said, very softly. "What did he say to you? You were right about him." "I'm sorry, miss. You should not be. You warned me clearly. Miss Hollis, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask it once." "Yes, miss." "Are you the Dowager Marchioness of Ashendale?" The maid did not answer. She did not answer for a very long moment, and Cordelia heard, very faintly, Theron's voice from somewhere downstairs, calling for his horse. Then Marwyn Hollis, who was not Marwyn Hollis, raised her eyes. "Yes," she said. "I am." Cordelia did not move. The Dowager did not move either. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, as a maid stood, but her shoulders had changed. Her shoulders were the shoulders of a woman who had been bowed to for 40 years, and she was no longer bothering to disguise them. "Miss Vane, I owe you an explanation. I will accept whatever portion of your forgiveness you find that you can give. But I would ask, before I begin, that you sit down, because what I am about to tell you is not short, and I would not wish the future Marchioness of Ashendale to hear it standing up in her own dressing room." Cordelia sat down. The Dowager Marchioness of Ashendale took a breath, and she began to speak. The Dowager did not sit. She stood in the center of the dressing room, with her hands folded in the maid's posture she had been wearing for 9 days, and she looked at Cordelia with an expression Cordelia could not, at first, identify. It was the careful stillness of someone setting down a very heavy object she had been carrying for a long time. "My name is Brenna Ashendale. I am Theron's mother. I came to this house 9 days ago in the role of your lady's maid, because I did not believe my son when he told me what kind of woman he intended to marry." Cordelia did not answer. The Dowager went on. "My son has refused 6 matches in 3 years. 2 of those families would have brought this house alliances older than the river, and 1 would have brought a fortune larger than the one this estate already has. Theron declined them all without a reason. He simply said no. Until last summer, he wrote to me from his cousin's house and informed me, in 3 sentences, that he had asked a Miss Cordelia Vane to marry him, and that she had said yes, and that I was to expect a wedding in the spring. 3 sentences, Cordelia said. 3 sentences. I counted. Cordelia almost laughed. I had never heard your name. I had heard, vaguely, of your father. I knew nothing of you. And my son, for the first time in 3 years, had said yes, and he had said it before I could speak to him. And I will admit, Miss Vane, that my first response wasn't delight. What was it? Suspicion. I have been the mistress of 2 great houses, and I have buried my husband, and I have raised a son to manhood, and I have learned that when something happens very quickly and very completely, there is usually a reason for both. I assumed you were either very clever or that my son had been very lonely. I did not consider, until I came here, the possibility that you were neither, and that he had simply met you and known." The Dowager's voice did not shake, but it was, very slightly, less even than it had been. "I came, therefore, to look. I dismissed my own household servants for a fortnight on a country errand, and I came to the agency in Bentham Court under a name I had used once before. Lady Hollyford knew. No one else has known. My fiancé did not know. He suspected. He has known me for 31 years, and he is not a stupid man. He suspected within 3 days of my arrival, but he didn't know. He was, in fact, the reason I extended my stay. I had intended to leave after a week. I did not, because I was not yet finished." "Finished doing what?" "Watching you, Miss Vane." Cordelia rose. She crossed to the window and stood with her back to the Dowager, And what did you find, my lady? I found a young woman who knows how to read a room, who corrects herself when she is wrong and does not when she is right, who watched her new lady's maid for 3 days without speaking, and who then asked the one question to which the maid did not have a prepared answer, who put on the cream gown last night, knowing perfectly well that I had laid it out, and walked into a dining room with her mind already made up about a charming man in a beautiful coat. I found, Miss Vane, a young woman whom I would have chosen for my son myself, if I had been clever enough to look in the right county. Cordelia did not turn from the window. My lady. Brenna. My lady. You have spent 9 days in my service. You have brushed my hair. You have laid out my gowns. You have stood at my dressing table and listened to me speak about your son. You have warned me about a man who came to this house under false pretenses. You have done all of this without telling me who you were. Yes. And you are now telling me that you have approved of me. I am. And I am to be grateful. No, Miss Vane, you are to be angry if you wish to be. You are to be hurt if you wish to be. I am telling you what I have done because you asked me to, and because in 3 weeks and 4 days you will be the mistress of this house, and I would not have you begin your married life believing that I have ever taken you lightly. I took you seriously enough to come here in disguise, and seriously enough to stay long past the point at which I had decided in your favor. Cordelia turned, finally, from the window. Why did you stay past the point at which you had decided? Because of Sir Reland Marche. Cordelia became very still. You knew he was coming. I knew he had been making inquiries. I knew his situation. I knew he would, sooner or later, find a way to come to this house. When I learned of his arrival, I decided to stay until he had gone, because I did not wish to leave you to face him alone, and because I did not entirely trust my son to handle a man like Sir Reland without provoking a duel. A duel? It is a small word for what Theron is capable of when he is angry. Quiet angers, in my experience, are the ones that end with someone bleeding on a damp morning in a wood. Sir Reland will leave tomorrow. He will not return. And you, Miss Vane, will be the Marchioness of Ashendale in 3 weeks and 4 days. The dowager had not moved from the center of the room. She stood there, with her hand still folded in the maid's posture, and Cordelia understood, with a sudden small ache in her chest, that the older woman did not quite know how to step out of the role. Cordelia crossed the room. She came to stand in front of the dowager, and she said, very quietly, "Brenna." The dowager's eyes filled. She did not cry, but her eyes filled, and the line of her mouth softened by a fraction, and she said, "Yes. Tomorrow morning at 6, I would like you to brush my hair one more time, as Marwyn Hollis, and then I would like you to leave this room as Marwyn, and to dress, and to come to breakfast as my mother by marriage. I would like Theron to see you sit down at the table and tell him what you have done. I would like Lady Drusilla to be present, because she will pretend not to enjoy it, and she will enjoy it enormously. I do not wish to begin my marriage with a secret in the dressing room." The dowager looked at her for a long moment. Then very slowly, she inclined her head. It was not a maid's nod. "Miss Vane, you will do very well in this house. Brenna." "Yes. I would not have lasted 3 days in yours." The dowager almost smiled. She did not, but it was close. The door closed. She did not yet know that Sir Reland Marche had not gone to the green room. She did not yet know that he had ridden out at 4 in the afternoon in the direction of the village, and that he had not come back. The letter arrived the next morning at 9:15, exactly when the post arrived, and Mrs. Pendle brought it to the breakfast table on a silver salver, because it had been addressed to Miss Cordelia Vane, in a hand Mrs. Pendle did not know. Cordelia opened it at the table. She had been about to laugh at something Theron had just said. She had, an hour earlier, watched Marwyn Hollis come down the staircase in the dove-gray gown of the dowager, and she had watched Theron rise from his chair when his mother entered the room, and stop where he stood, and look at her for one long, perfectly silent moment, and then say, "Mother." She had watched Lady Drusilla put down a cup of chocolate and say, "Brenna, you absolute woman," in a tone of unconcealed delight. She had watched Theron, at the end of his mother's confession, turn to Cordelia with an expression so naked and so grateful that she had felt the heat rise in her face at her own breakfast table. She had been about to laugh. She opened the letter. The room went out of focus around her. "Cordelia." Theron from the head of the table. "What is it?" She did not answer. She read the letter twice, very carefully, and then she folded it once, and she set it down on the white cloth beside her plate, and she said, in a voice that was so calm she did not recognize it, "Sir Reland Marche has written to my father." The silence at the breakfast table was complete. "He has written to inform my father," Cordelia went on, "that he has reason to believe that my engagement to Lord Ashendale is, in his words, the result of a household irregularity. He has named Marwyn Hollis. He has named the dressing room. He has implied, without saying, that there is a connection between the lady's maid and my fiancé that ought to be examined. He has suggested my father may wish to come to Ashendale Hall before the wedding, and that he, Sir Reland, would be honored to escort him." Lady Drusilla set down her cup so carefully that it made no sound. The dowager, in the dove-gray gown, did not move. Theron rose. He set his napkin beside his plate. He walked the length of the breakfast table without speaking, and he came to stand behind Cordelia's chair, and he placed one hand on her shoulder, and the steadiness of it was the most frightening thing Cordelia had felt in 3 days. "Read it again, please." She read it again. When she had finished, Theron took the letter from the table. He folded it. He put it inside his coat. He said, to no one in particular, "He rode to the village yesterday afternoon. He did not return. He has paid a boy to ride to my fiancé's father with it. He has arranged the timing so that the post would arrive to her before any of us could speak." Theron, his mother's voice. "Sit down. Mother, sit down, my son." He did not sit down. Cordelia turned in her chair to look up at him, and she saw, in his face, the quiet anger his mother had warned her of yesterday afternoon. It looked like a man performing arithmetic. "Theron, he has not won. Sit down. He has not won. He has written to your father. Yes. With my mother's name in it. Yes. Theron." She covered his hand with her own. "Sit down. Please. We are going to deal with this together, not by you riding out to find him. You are not going to give him the satisfaction of a duel. You are not going to give him a story to tell." He stood there for one more long moment. Then he went around the table and sat down again at the head of it. "Brenna," Lady Drusilla, in a careful voice, "what do you intend to do?" "I intend," the dowager said, "to write to Cordelia's father this morning, in my own hand, with my own seal. I intend to tell him plainly what I have done and why. I intend to tell him that his daughter has acquitted herself in this house with a grace I had not expected and could not have invented, and that I would be proud to call her my daughter. I intend to send the letter by my own man, on my own horse, by the fastest road. It will arrive before the post does. Mother." Theron, very quietly, "Will it arrive before Sir Reland's letter?" "My man rides at a gallop and changes horses. My letter will arrive first. I have done this before, Theron, not for this reason. But I have done it before. And Sir Reland. Sir Reland will be dealt with, my son, but not by you. By me. He has put my name in a letter. He has done it under the impression that I am somewhere in the north of England, and that the maid he saw in this dressing room was someone else. and that no one of consequence is paying attention. He is going to discover that all three of those impressions were wrong. She rose. "I shall be in the writing room," she said. "Cordelia, come to me in an hour. Theron, you will not ride to the village today. You will not write to Sir Reland. You will not call him out. I forbid it as your mother, and as the woman who 26 years ago sat with you in a fever for a fortnight and would have given a year of my life for an extra day of yours. Do you understand?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, mother." She left the breakfast room. Theron put his hand over Cordelia's on the table. "I should have told you the first day what I suspected. Yes, I'm sorry. I know. If you had dismissed her on the third day. I almost did. And then she warned me about him, last night. Before I knew who she was. She warned me when she did not have to. She could have let him do whatever he was going to do, and watched, and confirmed every dark thing she had ever suspected about a country gentleman's daughter. She did not. She warned me, with nothing to gain." His hand on hers tightened. "That is what she does," he said quietly. "When she likes someone, she will not say that she likes them. She will warn them about something. I see. I am very glad, Cordelia, that she likes you." He raised her hand from the table and turned it over and pressed his lips, just once, to the center of her palm, in front of Lady Drusilla and the empty chair where his mother had been sitting, and a footman who had come in with fresh coffee and stopped at the door. And Cordelia did not move and did not breathe. Outside, on the gravel of the front drive, Cordelia heard the sound of a horse being brought round at a quick step, and the clean crack of hooves striking out down the avenue at a gallop. The Dowager's letter had begun its journey. The day passed strangely. Cordelia spent the morning in the writing room with the Dowager, dictating small details about her father. The Dowager wrote with a fine pen in a hand Cordelia now recognized, and she paused now and then to ask a question, and the questions were always the right ones. By 11, the letter had been sealed, and a man Cordelia had not previously seen had taken it from the Dowager's own hand at the steps of the south door and ridden out at a gallop. By 12, Sir Reland Marche had been written to. The Dowager wrote that letter herself, and she did not show it to Cordelia or Theron. She sealed it and gave it to a different man, who wrote out in a different direction. By 2, the household had been told. The Dowager assembled the staff in the great hall and explained, in 12 sentences, what she had done. Mrs. Pendle, who was a woman of considerable composure, looked for a moment as though she might weep, and then decided, quite visibly, not to. By 3, the wider trouble began to arrive. It arrived in a note from Lady Hollyford, who had heard that Sir Reland Marche had been seen at the village inn in considerable temper, telling a story to anyone who would listen. By 4, a second note had arrived. By 5, Mrs. Pendle came up to say that the cook had heard from the man who delivered the meat that there was talk in the village. The Dowager nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Pendle." Mrs. Pendle went. The Dowager turned to Cordelia and Theron and Lady Drusilla. "He has not waited for my letter," she said. "He's talking now. He's not a clever man, Sir Reland. He's a man who has been charming all his life, and who has just found out that charm did not work. He's talking. And the trouble with talk, my dears, is that it doesn't retract. Mother, what do we do?" The Dowager turned to Cordelia. "I should like to ask Cordelia." "I have an idea," Cordelia said. "He's telling a story in the village. The story rests, almost entirely, on the figure of Marwyn Hollis, who does not exist. Then I think we should give him a great many people who can tell him that she does not exist. In 4 days is the assembly at Holcombe and Magna. Half the county will be there. I think we should attend together. I think you, Brenna, should attend as yourself, on Theron's arm, with me on his other arm, and let the whole county understand, in the time it takes to cross a ballroom, that the Dowager Marchioness of Ashendale is in residence at Ashendale Hall and approves of her son's marriage. After that, Sir Reland's story will be a great deal harder to tell." Lady Drusilla made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Cordelia, you are going to be very dangerous in this family in about 2 years." "I shall try to be," the Dowager nodded. "It is a better plan than mine. Cordelia, you will wear the cream gown, the same cream gown." "Brenna, why the same gown?" "Because Sir Reland will be at the assembly. He will not have been able to resist. He will see you in the cream gown that you wore to the dinner where he humiliated himself, and he will see me on my son's arm in a gown he last saw me wear at his own father's funeral 6 years ago, and he will understand, in the time it takes him to cross a ballroom, exactly how badly he has misjudged his ground. I am, my dears, a vindictive woman, and I should not like to deny myself the pleasure." Lady Drusilla laughed aloud. "Brenna, I have missed you." Theron came across the room then. He came to where Cordelia was sitting on the small embroidered chair, and he knelt down beside her, on one knee, on the morning room rug, in front of his mother and his cousin, and he took both of her hands in his. "Cordelia, I told you, in the orangery, that if my mother were the woman in your dressing room, I would ask you to forgive me, and her in that order. Will you forgive me?" "I will. And her." "I have. I forgave both of you before either of you had finished asking." He raised her hands, and he held them against his face for one moment, and Cordelia felt the warmth of his cheek against the backs of her fingers, and the slow, even breath of him. Outside, on the south lawn, the long shadow of the yew at the end of the south walk had begun to reach across the grass. In 4 days, there would be an assembly at Holcombe Magna. In 3 weeks and 3 days, there would be a wedding. "Brenna," Cordelia said, without looking away from her fiancé. "Yes, my dear. Tomorrow morning, at 6, I should still like you to brush my hair." The Dowager stood by the window, with her face half in light and half in shadow, and her eyes were very full. "Yes, Cordelia," she said, "I shall." And in the village, 6 miles away, Sir Reland Marche was buying a 3rd bottle of wine for an audience that had begun, in the last hour, to thin. The reply from Cordelia's father arrived at noon the next day. It was 4 sentences. It was written in the steady hand of a country magistrate of long practice, addressed to the Dowager Marchioness of Ashendale by her full name and title, and sealed with the small private seal that Cordelia's father had used since she was a girl of 10. The Dowager read it. Then she handed it to Cordelia. "My lady, I have your letter, and I have also Sir Reland Marche's letter, which arrived 2 hours after yours. I have read both, and I have made my judgment, and my judgment is that any man who writes to a father about his daughter, without first writing to the daughter, is a man whose opinion of the matter does not require my further attention. My daughter is to be your daughter in 3 weeks and 3 days, and it would be the great honor of my life if you and your son would consider me, from this date, in the light of a relation. Yours, etc." Cordelia did not cry. The Vanes were not a family of public weeping, but she pressed the heel of one hand against her left eye, briefly, in the way her father did when something had moved him. She folded the letter and put it inside her sleeve, against her wrist. She came to where the Dowager was sitting. "Brenna, he has called you a relation. He has never called anyone a relation who was not. In 4 sentences, he disposed of Sir Reland Marche, gave his blessing to my marriage, and made an offer of family, which is the largest thing he has to give. My father is not a man who wastes a sentence. I have understood as much from his letter. Cordelia knelt down beside the high-backed chair. She placed her hands on the older woman's knee. Brenna, I should like to write to him in your name, to say that you accept the offer of family. I should like to be the one who writes that, because I should like, when I am married, to know that the first letter you sent to my father, as his relation, was written by my hand. For the first time in 11 days, the older woman's composure failed. Her hand came up and rested on Cordelia's hair, and the dowager said, in a voice that was not entirely steady, "Yes, child. Write it. And Cordelia, you will call me Mother, from the wedding. Not before, I should not like to spoil it. But from the wedding, you will call me Mother. Yes, Brenna." The men in the village, for the next 2 days, did not stop talking about Sir Rayland Marchais. They talked about him because he had stayed at the inn for 4 nights running. They talked about him because he had told a story that, by the 3rd night, had begun to contradict itself. They talked about him because, on the morning of the 4th day, he had received a letter, by hand, from the Dowager Marchioness of Ashendale in person, brought to the inn by a man on a grey horse who had waited at the door until Sir Rayland came out, and who had, in the presence of the innkeeper and 4 labourers, handed him the letter, and waited while he read it. There had been no reply. Sir Rayland had walked back into the inn and asked for his bill, and paid it, and ridden out within the hour, in the direction of the south, away from the assembly at Holcombe Magna, and toward a married aunt of his who lived in Bath. The story about Ashendale Hall died with him. The body of it left the village with Sir Rayland on the south road. The dowager wrote, in the next 3 days, to 9 households in 3 counties. Lady Drusilla had 3 women to tea, and was beautifully indiscreet about a small private joke involving a country agency and a cream gown. The story shifted. On the 4th evening, the assembly at Holcombe Magna took place. Cordelia wore the cream gown. The dowager wore a gown of the deepest grey, with a long single string of pearls that had been her husband's mother's, and she came down the steps of Ashendale Hall on her son's arm, and they rode the 4 miles to Holcombe Magna in a silence that was anticipatory. They walked in. The room understood. It took, Cordelia thought, perhaps 11 seconds. The master of ceremonies announced them. Then, in the slow and total way of an assembly, the room turned. Heads turned. Fans paused. A young man in a blue coat, who had been about to ask a girl to dance, set down his glass without remembering he had been holding it. The orchestra did not stop, but somewhere a violinist's bow lifted off a string for 2 whole bars before resuming. The Dowager Marchioness of Ashendale was in residence. She was on her son's arm. Her other arm rested, very lightly, in the gloved hand of a young woman in a cream gown, who walked into the assembly as though she had been walking into assemblies on the dowager's arm all her life. Sir Rayland Marchais was not in the room. Theron danced with Cordelia 3 times, once at the start, once in the middle, and once at the end, and the 3rd time, the room watched, and did not look away. After the 3rd dance, Theron led her not to the dowager, but to the long open doors at the side of the ballroom, which gave on to a stone terrace. "Cordelia, there is one more thing I have not said to you." "Theron." "I love you," he said. He had not said it before. She had known. She had known for weeks. But he had not said it, and now he did. "I love you. I have loved you since the 3rd evening you spent at my cousin's house, when you sat at the long table and laughed at something my cousin's youngest son said, and you put your hand over your mouth because you thought you had laughed too loudly, and I sat at the other end of the table and I thought, that is the woman I am going to marry. I had decided anyway. I have been deciding it again, every day, since. Theron, you should have told me exactly now. You should have told me here. Like this. I love you. I love you, Theron. He kissed her in the half-light from the lanterns, and the master of ceremonies inside, who happened to be passing the doors at that precise moment, did them the great kindness of stepping smoothly across to draw a pair of curtains halfway, in such a manner that the room did not see the kiss, but understood that it had occurred. The orchestra played on. The wedding was 3 weeks and 3 days later. It was not, in the end, a small wedding. It had been planned as a small wedding. By the 3rd week of March, the assembly at Holcomb Magna had been the most discussed evening in 3 counties for 14 days running. The Dowager had received 47 letters in 11 days, and had answered all of them in her own hand. 47 families considered themselves owed an invitation. The Dowager had laughed at her writing desk and granted 23 of them. The other 24, she said to Cordelia, I intend to refuse with such politeness that they will spend the rest of their lives uncertain whether they were refused or whether the post lost the invitation. It is the only revenge in good taste available to me, and I shall have it. Brenna, you are very wicked. I am, my dear. I have been waiting 40 years to be wicked in this particular way. There was, in those 3 weeks, very little time for grand emotion. There was time for fittings and seatings and the choosing of wines. There was time for Cordelia's father to arrive, and for him to be received by the Dowager in the morning room, and for the 2 of them to spend an hour in private conversation, at the end of which the Dowager had emerged with her composure intact, and Cordelia's father had emerged with his eyes very slightly red around the edges. There was time, late at night, for Theron to come to the door of her dressing room and stand in the corridor speaking to her quietly for a quarter of an hour, with the door open between them, in the manner of a man who would not cross her threshold a single day before the wedding. There was time, in the last evening before the wedding, for Cordelia to go into the dressing room and find that Marwyn Hollis had laid out her wedding gown. The Dowager, in the dove-gray gown of the household maid, was standing at the wardrobe. For the last time, she said, very quietly, if you will allow it, as Marwyn, and then, in the morning, as your mother. Cordelia could not speak. She sat down at the dressing table. The Dowager took down her hair, and she dressed it, slowly, in a manner Cordelia had not seen her use before. A kind of plaiting at the back that Cordelia, in the looking-glass, recognized after a moment as the plaiting in a small portrait that hung in the long gallery, of a young woman with quiet eyes and a steady mouth, who had been the Dowager's own mother at the age of 23. When it was done, the Dowager set down the brush. She placed both hands very lightly on Cordelia's shoulders. You are my daughter, she said very simply. From the morning, from this hour, from now. You were my daughter from the day you put on the dove gown when I had laid out the gray, and walked down to breakfast with your hair an inch looser than you had ever worn it before. I knew it then. I have only been waiting to be allowed to say it. Mother. Yes, my child. Cordelia covered the Dowager's hand with her own. Neither of them cried, and after a long minute, the Dowager bent down and kissed the crown of her head, very lightly in the place where the plaiting began. Sleep, my child. In the morning, Mrs. Pendle brought warm water and a tray with bread and chocolate, and the news that Lord Theron, against all custom, was already up and had been seen, half an hour ago, walking the south lawn alone in his shirt-sleeves. Cordelia laughed quietly. Tell him, Mrs. Pendle, that he is to put on his coat, or I shall not marry him. My lady. And Mrs. Pendle, thank you for everything, from the day I came to this house. Mrs. Pendle blinked once, very deliberately, and inclined her head and went out. The wedding was at 11. Cordelia walked into the family chapel on her father's arm. Her father did not say anything. He was a man who, at the great hinges of his life, became more silent rather than less. He did not let go of her arm until the very last step. Then he placed her hand in Theron's, and he stepped back. The rest Cordelia could not afterward recall in detail. She remembered the dowager's face in the front pew, calm and very still. She remembered Lady Drusilla, 2 pews behind, weeping with such indecorous abandon that Mrs. Pendle, beside her, had to pass her a handkerchief. She remembered Theron's hand in hers, steady, perfectly still. She remembered her own voice, saying, "I will," and not faltering. She remembered the bell of the chapel, and the bright spring light on the gravel, and the staff of Ashendale Hall lined along the front steps in their finest, and her father walking 3 paces behind, and her new mother walking 1 pace behind her father, with the long single string of pearls catching the sun. She remembered Theron's voice beside her as they came out into the light. "Lady Ashendale." She remembered the way her own breath caught at it. She remembered turning her face up to him, and finding him already looking down at her, and finding in his face the thing she had seen for the first time in the orangery, only now, for the first time, without a single thing held back. "My lord," she said, "my lady, I love you. I know, my love. I know." The bell rang on. 3 years later, on a still summer evening in the long gallery at Ashendale Hall, Cordelia Ashendale stood with her hand on the frame of a small portrait and listened to the sound of laughter coming up from the south lawn. She had, 3 years ago, walked down the aisle of the family chapel on her father's arm. She had, in the 11 days before the wedding, learned the shape of a woman who had come to her dressing room as a maid, and who had stayed, in the end, as her mother. She had been, in the 3 years since, the Marchioness of Ashendale. She had also, more than a year ago, become a mother herself. The laughter on the south lawn was the laughter of 3. It was Lady Drusilla, who had taken to coming for the whole month of June each year, telling, for the 11th time, the story of how she had nearly choked on a piece of toast the morning the dowager had come down the staircase in the dove-gray gown. It was the dowager who, 3 years on, was beginning, very slightly, to laugh aloud rather than only at the corner of her mouth. It was Cordelia's father who had become very fond of Drusilla's anecdotes. Theron came along the gallery behind her. She heard his step before she turned. She had learned his step in the first month of their marriage, the way one learns a piece of music. He stopped, as he always did, 1 step short of where she was standing, and he set his hand, very lightly, at the small of her back. "Wool gathering," she smiled, looking at the small portrait. He looked over her shoulder. The small portrait was the one of his grandmother at 23, with the plaiting in her hair that the dowager had on the night before the wedding, dressed in Cordelia's hair as a kind of silent promise. I remember my mother told me when I was a boy that this was the only portrait in this house that she had ever truly liked. She has not told me that. She would not. She does not say compliments aloud, my mother. She gives them in actions. She has given you a great many. What are you really thinking about? I'm thinking about the morning Marwyn Hollis arrived at Ashendale Hall. I am thinking about the gravel under the carriage wheels, and the way she did not look at the house, and the way I knew, in the first 10 seconds, that she was not what she said she was. You knew in the first 10 seconds. I knew in the first second. And you did not say. I did not say. I waited. I watched her for 3 days. I asked her 3 days after that. She did not answer me, and I did not press her, and I did not dismiss her. Why not? Because some part of me wanted to know. I had been at Ashendale Hall for a month. I had been treated with kindness and with courtesy by everyone in this house, and I had not, until that morning, met one person whose attention to me had a real edge to it. And there she was. I thought, This woman is paying real attention to me. I thought, whoever she is, I want to know who she thinks I am at the end of it. You wanted her to look at you. I wanted someone to look at me. I had said yes to you in a garden in summer. I had been afraid every day since. I had been afraid, most of all, that none of it was going to truly look at me. That I was going to live in this house for 40 years and be very politely never seen. And then a woman came to my dressing room, who I knew was not who she said she was. And she looked at me, and I was relieved by her. My love, do you remember? In the orangery, I asked you to give me 1 week. I remember. I gave you 3 days, and you did not dismiss her. If you had walked into the morning room and told me that you would not have a strange woman in your dressing room one more night, what would have happened? She thought about it. I think we would have been happy. We would have been a son and his mother and his bride, and we would have made it work. We would have been polite. We would have been correct. I would have called her, in time, by a careful version of her name. She would have called me, in time, by a careful version of mine. But she would not have brushed my hair the night before my wedding in the plaiting of her own mother. And she would not have called me her daughter. She put her hand against his chest. I had a choice, in the writing room, on the 3rd morning. When she would not answer me, I could have made her answer. I did not. I chose instead to wait, to let her do what she had come to do. I did not know I was choosing. I thought at the time that I was only being careful. I understand now that I was choosing. I was choosing to see what she was. And in seeing what she was, I gave her the chance to see what I was. And it is from that small chance thereon that all of this gallery, this evening, this child upstairs, this laughter on the lawn, has come. He raised her hand to his mouth and kissed the center of the palm. Promise me one thing, that you will never tell our son the full story of how you came to be his mother, until he is old enough to understand it, because I should like, in the meantime, to be able to take some of the credit. She laughed aloud, and the sound carried out through the open window and down into the south lawn, and somewhere a child's small voice could be heard, saying, with the peremptory dignity of 15 months, the one word he had so far mastered, which was indistinguishable between Mama and Grandma, and which was the source, at present, of a small ongoing diplomatic dispute between the women on the lawn. Theron, some doors only open the once, and some women only knock the once, and the only thing I did, in this whole house that mattered, was that on the 3rd morning, when she stood in my writing room and would not say her name, I did not send her away. Lady Ashendell, come outside. My mother is laughing. It does not happen often. We should not waste it. He took her hand. He led her along the long gallery, past 400 years of Ashendell ancestors, past the small portrait of his grandmother, past the door of the morning room where she had stood, 3 years ago, with her fingers pressed against the cold of a window, watching a small woman get out of a carriage in the rain. The dowager, on the south lawn, in a chair set in the gold of the late light, looked up. She saw her son and her daughter come out together. She did not say anything. She lifted, very slightly, the corner of her mouth. To you, watching at the other end of this story, thank you for sitting with Cordelia and Theron, and with the woman in the dove-gray gown, and with the long, quiet hour in a writing room when one careful young woman did not, in the end, send a stranger away. Some stories are about storms and the choices weather forces on us. This one was not. This one was about a small choice made on a quiet morning by a woman who could have chosen otherwise, and who chose instead to wait, to watch, to allow another woman to be more than she appeared. We do not, most of us, live in storms. Most of us live in mornings. And the mornings are where the lives are made. If you have stayed with us until here, it is because somewhere in your own life there is a door, and someone is waiting on the other side of it, and you have not yet decided whether to open it. Decide gently. Decide patiently. Decide the way Cordelia decided, which is to say, not all at once, but with the small, daily attention of a woman who knows that the truth, given time, will speak for itself. If this story has moved you, do stay with the channel. There are more like it. More quiet rooms. More careful women. More mornings on which a door opens, and on the other side of it, a life begins. Subscribe and ring the bell, and we shall see one another at the next door, and the next morning, and the next quiet beginning. Thank you with all my heart for being here.